with our next panel. Digital investment is soaring, yet many manufacturers struggle to see the impact on their actual performance. So why is there still a gap between connected systems and execution reality? We're going to hear a real-world story from a top 3 pharmaceutical company that moved beyond fragmented planning. So how do we achieve stable, execution-ready scheduling? Please welcome Brian Vogel, the CEO of On-Time Edge, as he will discuss this question with his guests. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much. You're able to hear me? Voila. Well, I'd like to introduce you to Tim Conlon.
Morning.
Morning. Dennis Feist.
Hi, good morning.
And our special guest, Aaron Muhl, all from On-Time Edge. Well, guys, please sit down.
Take the center place, Dennis.
So, how are you, Omar? So in the interest of level setting, we, the 3 companies, Pfizer, On-Time Edge, and PlanetTogether, have entered into a kind of 3-legged stool, if you will, partnership a number of years ago. And collaboratively, we've been able to drive a complete life cycle integration across the product development. And so today what we want to do is talk about some of those challenges, speak about some of the lessons learned, and truthfully have as much open interaction with you guys as possible. So with that being said, I'm Brian Vogel. I am with the CEO of On-Time Edge, and I've spent the totality of my career in shop floor optimization.
Okay. Hi guys, I'm Dennis Feist. I work for Pfizer for the manufacturing site in Freiburg, and I am team lead for the drug production scheduling. So we are working really close with the shop floor together, and yeah. So I hope I can give you some insights and interesting points for you, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. I'm Tim from PlanetTogether, and we are the publishers of the software that Pfizer has been implementing at their factories, not only in Germany, but around the world to optimize production scheduling. So I'm here basically to learn as well from Dennis's experience, and also to work quite closely with our longtime partnership with On-Time Edge, and how they have been supporting our client together.
And I'm Aaron Muhl with On-Time Edge. I'm a managing partner. I was one of the people involved with the Pfizer and PlanetTogether relationship at the very beginning, and so I'm here to answer some additional questions when we get there. Thanks.
Fantastic. So, Dennis, if you would be so kind, would you please walk through a high level of what your program looks like?
Yes, sure. So currently we have really much manufacturing sites across the entire Pfizer network. So every Pfizer site was working independently. So there was no common system. Especially for my team in Freiburg, so I'm the drug product team lead for scheduling. We were using more or less the entire time Excel-based or paper-based spreadsheets to share this information with the shop floor. Despite we have planning systems already in place. So that's the point where before we got a new system across the entire supply chain for Pfizer, and yeah, that's where we are now. Yeah.
So at scale, Pfizer will end up with 26 instances across 14 sites. And while that in and of itself is impressive, what's truly impressive is the life cycle that's evolved. Originally, the challenge was you would have a plan, you would then go to execute your schedule, and without connectivity to the people, the process, and the equipment, getting real-time confirmations of availability, equipment status, caused some initial concerns and challenges. So we want to talk a little bit about those and how we've collectively built integration back to your MES shop floor and OE systems and packaging.
So from my perspective, the most important thing is that we create a good master data quality. So we needed to create the machine data, the people constrained data into the system, and as well the material availability. So I think that's the most important thing we did. We need to improve the master data quality on these 3 different types. Yeah.
So Aaron, if you'd be kind enough to weigh in on data integrity, irrespective if it's a regulated process and or not, and talk about its importance not just to scheduling and planning integration, but kind of overall, optimization or enablement.
Yeah, happy to. It's interesting, supply chain planning and production scheduling systems in particular rely on a lot of data to come up with the answers, right? Ultimately, you're inputting things like your product cycle times, your inventory levels, and you're looking for the system to give you the best answer possible for future events, right? So when should I run an order? When should I run an operation? On which equipment should I run it? And ultimately, you're relying on master data to help make those decisions. And a lot of companies, that master data can be 10, 15, 20 years old. And so by having a feedback loop, what it's doing is it's not just telling you when your operation's complete or when your order's complete, but it's also giving you additional information to update your master data. So a lot of the things that you've been using to do your planning and to do your scheduling with over the years, now you can kind of see that maybe I have too much of a buffer built into a cycle time, or I don't have enough of a buffer built into a cycle time. And so it allows you to not only gauge how you're actually executing, but gauge when it's appropriate to update your master data and make those changes so you can come up with a more effective plan with a more effective schedule that's realistic for the shop floor to get done, but it doesn't provide too much of a buffer, and you can use your capacity effectively.
So, Tim, in the context of partnering, not every solution out of the box is going to solve every problem. So, do you want to take a second and talk about the collaboration of product roadmap that you've formed and what that looks like longer term? And I can certainly weigh in on it as well.
Sure. So we continue to evolve the product roadmap, and we do that very closely with customers, especially Pfizer and some of the big enterprise customers that we have together, and we work with OnTime Edge. So we very much rely on collaboration, feedback from our customers, feedback from our partners, in terms of how do we, especially in now we're working with Pfizer and other process industry manufacturers, how do we evolve the solution to meet their requirements going forward? So we have a rolling quarterly product roadmap that goes forward. We consult with customers. We have a close relationship with Pfizer on developing our scheduling solutions for the pharmaceutical industry, and we make that widely available to our customer and partner community. So in a nutshell, I would also maybe just, for Dennis, talking about a familiar story that we've seen many, many times, moving from Excel scheduling to a real scheduling solution is something that I think all of us hear all the time, right? And maybe Dennis, if you had some insights in terms of how that
No, Tim, that's a brilliant segue and setup, and you took some words right out of my mouth, because I think I think we're in this together. What it really speaks to is change management and creating the pull versus push. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think with the Excel spreadsheet, my schedulers especially, they felt confident with it, but it created in the shop floor a lot of space for discussion, because the Excel spreadsheet wasn't data-based and with hard facts. So my schedulers needed to defend the schedules, and they need the decisions or discussions. They took really long. Only it was about small facts, small orders maybe, but the decisions were so long because there was no transparency in the Excel spreadsheet, for example, as we now have in the system. So now we have, as I would call it, single point of truth. Before we had many or 2 point. We had a system, but the demand signals were not aligned with the Excel spreadsheet. So now the shop floor is more convinced on our schedule because we are managing the capacity. We have the right master data integrated, and yeah, now I think the transparency is key. We can really take smarter and faster decisions relying on the system, and that's, I think, the most important thing now, that we have a common base, no dual sources, so one single source of truth, I would call it. Yeah.
That's fantastic, and I think it harkens back to the two earlier points of the importance of data integrity. And as much as validated environments track who touches something, why they touch it, what did they do, oftentimes it's stored in siloed back ends. So when you look at how this all came together, you want to talk a little bit about some of the integration challenges that needed to be overcome, and then ultimately how that ties back to proving out to the shop floor, OT and IT side of the equation, that this is the correct and accurate data, the fair, if you will, and then build from that. Dennis, I'm sorry.
Could you please repeat it a little bit?
So earlier we touched on data integrity and the absolute criticality of it. And in the interest of getting additional or adjacent data to help make those better decisions, there's an integration impact. So I think it would be important if we talk a little bit about how you guys address that and how we collectively continue to evolve. I know, like, for instance, Freiburg has a very large backlist for continuous improvement, and then tying that back, there's always that value proposition of, hey, how does this drive better impact or higher quality? So just kind of, in general terms, that's more what I'm trying to understand is how do we help other manufacturers address that integration challenge as they chase, fair and equitable data?
So from my perspective, a really important point is the standardization of not only of the system across the entire supply chain, it's as well the standardization work the people are doing, so that everyone is working in a standardized process with the same tasks, so you can better measure what they are doing. I think that's a really important thing. Now we can compare with other sites. We can see how we can measure the plant stability, and yeah. So I think, and where we see gaps, now we can see and identify the gaps, and out of the gaps we can improve. So yeah.
So, and I think that, to an earlier point of change management, it often gets overlooked. But when you guys set out, you set out a business framework that ultimately was driving the points you just raised, but there was also a collaboration of how do you drive those standards? How do you ensure that everyone is driving the same SOPs? And it's an area that, Pfizer has been out in front of, even back from your MES, kind of alignment over the last 15 years. I think you guys are unique in that mindset. So again, from both a change management and alignment, is there any other lesson learned that we think we should be sharing or zeroing in on?
So I would say in the global supply chain, and every manufacturer is depending on external delays from materials, from raw materials, for example. And I think the most important thing is that you have a visualization who is given the PlanetTogether system, for example, the scheduling system, that where is the demand date coming from, which decision need to be taken. So you need visibility on the criticality of some changes and external factors you can't avoid. Especially in our business, we are always rely on the release process of materials by our quality. So it can be that from day one to day two, the general situation is changing. Mm-hmm. And there I think you need to understand which is the impact and how you can change and replenish it and display it in the system, and how is the reaction possible. Yeah, so And for me, there you need a good system which gives the distance, this visibility. Yeah.
Well, and I think visualization is absolutely fundamental. Aaron, in the context of visualization, and even from an AI perspective and how it might apply to scheduling, what is your perspective on like the must-haves or the foundational approach?
Well, that's a good question. I think, as we get into AI, the systems have a tendency to jump to the answer, but not necessarily explain how they approach that answer. And especially when you're looking at a role in a company where a person's sitting down and maybe they're using Excel to put together a schedule, or maybe they're using Excel to put together their supply chain plan. When the system is more capable and it has the ability to run the mathematical execution faster and jump to the answer, people still want to be able to see and it kind of error-proof it. And especially we hear about AI a lot where it needs to be error-proofed. And so I think it's even more important from a visualization perspective that applications show the users how they arrived at the answer or the plan or the schedule, right? And allow people to question it and play with it, because it's not really just about getting the right answer. It's making sure everyone understands how the answer is arrived at.
I think that's a great set of points. Dennis, I don't know if there was something you wanted to say, you leaned in. No? I guess the nod means we're in agreement. So when you look at keeping it honest, meaning you go in, you have a site that was using Excel, you then get them on board. Can you talk a little bit about the training and how, again, back to that push versus pull? Are you involving the shop floor folks and the scheduling folks much earlier in design, and then ultimately getting higher fidelity for each of the testing sequences? Because what we found is that if you do not go through that process, a lot of times people revert to what they know, and that's usually Excel. So can you talk a little bit about how you maintain that control and accountability to make sure that people are getting the value out of this investment?
Yeah, sure. So the first important thing is that we share our solution and the schedule directly and which data is influencing the system. So we are really transparent now. Before it was more every department, so planning versus shop floor, is working on his own topics, I would say, and issues. But now it's a common base. We created a common base to see how is the data we get from our customers and how can we generate a really stable schedule. So I think the most important thing is that we created a transparency and a common base where we can a closer look together on it. And as well, sometimes there are some good questions and enhancements coming from the shop floor. So, we're here together and we're working together on a solution. What is the best schedule the system is proposing us? That's the base, I would say. But it's the base and the system is only as good as the data quality is impacting, and the input of the data quality is so important, because the better the input, the better the output, and as many information we get from the shop floor, so as maintenances and handle these capacities, the better the output and the scheduling solution, I would say.
Great, thank you for that. So Tim and Aaron, in the interest of looking at the Pfizer program, you look at production, you look at packaging, what are some of the adjacencies that would be a natural, kind of inclination to want to go to next as this matures so they can continue to get return and expand the value equation?
It's a great question. So, especially, I think it's true of the pharmaceutical industry in general. A lot of the time spent is by the quality department, right? So there's time spent doing testing when raw materials arrive at the factory. There's time spent taking samples back to the lab. There's time spent with the finished good. And so being able to schedule those activities and provide the same level of transparency for the quality tasks, I think would be amazing, right? Above and beyond just production tasks.
Yeah, so it's so important, as you said, the release of key materials, key components that we can produce, and we as well there in this type of processes. It's so important that you create their transparency and that you know when will a material be released and when can I use it. So yeah, that's a really important point what you're saying.
And how long will it take? Because especially when there's a quarantine activity, and it's knowing how many days that's going to take allows the schedule to know when to schedule the next production activity.
Yeah.
No, so if you look at when you're coming in from a raw ingredient, one of your partners, that quality protocol is vastly different than, say, one of your sister plants. But needless to say, there's still a data integration that has to happen. And Tim or Aaron, can we talk a little bit about what is some of those challenges and lessons learned that we now know be better suited in, say, a messaging services bus or in some type of data broker, as opposed to looking at a material master or point-to-point solution, for instance, just as a kind of baseline.
Yeah, just a couple of words. I'm just really echoing what Dennis has been talking about in terms of data integrity and making sure that upfront, ahead of any scheduling implementation project, that the data is truly verified. We do see in a lot of customer cases that they think their ERP is okay, and then we get to the point where we start trying to do some scheduling, and it's not. And we have to take a step, collectively we take a step back and we take a look at how do we make sure that the data that goes in is usable, is valid, and is going to help us create a constraint-based schedule, daily, weekly, or whatever frequency is necessary. And that is something that we see over and over again, where a lot of companies come to us and they're very self-confident about, the ERP is fine, everything's good. Take a closer look though. And I think that is maybe one lesson or one piece of advice that I would offer to the general audience is take a real close look at what you've got in terms of your data today and where the potential gaps might be that could interfere with the project. Aaron, maybe you've got more experience here than I do.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is at Pfizer, we were able to take advantage of a really well thought out architecture and a mature architecture. So as Dennis said, not only is it important to have the data, but know where it originates from, right? And so a lot of times the data that's in the ERP system originates from somewhere else. And you not only have to know where it comes from, but how often it arrives from that location, right? And so in order to have a good data strategy, it's important to really understand where's the source, how it arrives there, how is it transformed, right? Maybe the name or the format changes, and then how often it changes. A lot of times there may be a 24-hour latency for some data, whereas shop floor systems in both production and quality, there may only be 15-minute latency, and that's not always apparent to users. So having a data strategy with a true bus, where the data can be available in basically real time defined by the system, is so critical. And in some ways, the companies that are behind in their data strategy have an opportunity to really leapfrog ahead and invest in some newer technology that's only been out the last 5 years, faster than the companies that have traditionally been ahead.
Yeah, I think that's actually a brilliant point, because you look at some of the vendors in the marketplace that have long-standing footprints. Think MES, you think Verum. There's a lot of hooks that are already inherent within the system. Same thing with Rockwell. Same thing with the Prezo. The list goes on. But when you look at the contextualization, the architecture becomes fundamental to how that data is consumed, in what format it's consumed, and most importantly, the time upon which it's consumed. And if you do not have the three of those things completely aligned, your value equation plummets and the likelihood of quality impacts increases systematically. So I agree with both points that have been raised. So as we look through, you mentioned quality. I'm a firm believer that the entire quality process, even these companies that have 16 different lab systems and different quality testing systems, I think that that's fundamentally an area for great efficiency. But I also think about, maintenance, systems and, and the cleaning, tracking and integrating them, because was it clean is different than what it was cleaned with, and understanding that correlation. So, has this been an issue that Pfizer has had to address specifically?
So it's a really good point, because one of our first processes regarding increasing the data quality was creating the setup metrics, we call it. So there we know which product is being produced before and which product is coming after a production campaign, I would say. So, and it depends on which product is being produced, which time I need to clean. So the cleaning time needs to be as less as possible, but you as well need to align it with the customer requirements. So yeah, for us it really was important to integrate and set up a setup matrix where we can standardize data sets regarding cleaning times, setup times for production, and this will be considered in the system as well. So, yeah, this is one really good point.
Thank you. Aaron, please.
I mean, I'd like to weigh in here because it's such an important topic, especially in pharmaceutical. A lot of the rules around when to clean have to do with local laws, right? Sometimes they're based on laws local in that country. Sometimes it's based on maybe the EU, and so they're different. And even the interpretation of those laws can be different from site to site. And so this was a great example of collaboration where it's pretty complex to build in the ability to insert cleans into a schedule based on the way that each individual site wants to do it. And PlanetTogether had some nice capabilities there, but we actually pointed out, On-Time Edge and Pfizer together pointed out, hey, if PlanetTogether makes the following enhancements or changes to the software, it can be even better. And it happened pretty quickly, right? And so now the way that the cleaning rules are configured, it not only works for Freiburg or a specific plant, but it can work globally. And it's going to happen more in food. We see more and more regulations coming into food, so cleaning rules in food are going to become important. And so it's a great example where feedback from both the customer and the partner made it into the software extremely quickly and made the overall offering better.
Yeah, and the fact that we are in 14 sites to date, right, around the world, right, is a testament to taking the feedback from Pfizer, big user group, as well as On-Time Edge, our partners, and country by country taking a look at what we really needed to do and incorporating that into the software, and also taking a global view in terms of, well, this is going to be relevant, as you pointed out, Aaron, in the food and beverage industry, other process industries where there's regulation increases, things are changing by the day, and we're really trying to keep the software, call it a moving target, if you will, right? We want to keep up with what our customers need, and we want to get from 14 to as many Pfizer sites as we can around the world and meet all those global requirements.
I think if we took a step back, the path upon which Pfizer has executed with us collectively, there's not a lot of other organizations, irrespective of segment focus, that are driving this type of scale, this type of efficiency. So, Aaron, from your perspective, how important were really two aspects? One, domain expertise specific to scheduling and understanding the fundamental difference between scheduling and planning, and then taking it a step further and looking at the domain expertise of the regulated environment, and understand that sometimes process and discrete, when you have combo products or fill finish, they may merge. So the complexity increases, but if you want to talk a little bit about that, because I think it's catalyst, a key contributor, if you will, as to why we're at this stage collectively.
Yeah, it's why it's such a pleasure to work with Pfizer, because Pfizer as a culture understands that different sites are going to operate in different ways, and having a true global program for supply chain is an opportunity to standardize a lot of items, but not just blindly, right? So the entire program has been focused on change management, and it's been a combination of, where can we do things the same, but where can we learn from the sites and incorporate that back into the overall program so everyone benefits, and that's the trick, right? It's not just, a lot of times a system integrator or a company that sets a system up will be so focused on just getting the system up and running and not enough on training and enablement and change management. And these are real people that are impacted. Their jobs are changing. So, some people embrace that change. Some people get excited, and other people push back, especially when they've been doing things a certain way for a long, long time. And it's important to understand that and have empathy, but also explain to them that it's going to happen. So get on board.
I think it's a really good point. I think the type of scheduling or the scheduling processes are now completely different as before, and the people need to understand that, and you need to adapt the process, and it takes time, and you need patience as well. So it's a really good point.
And it's so important. It's the bridge between supply chain and manufacturing, right? It's both. It touches so many different organizations, and it's not an easy journey, right? But it's so important.
Yeah, I think in the waning moments, it's super critical that we kind of tie back. If everything's so integrated, why do manufacturers still miss ask fulfill rates? And I think universally, data access is going to be one of the key contributors. But I'd love to understand from each of your perspective, where you think that challenge first originates, but most importantly, how do you take corrective action very quickly? You talked about visualization, but when you're looking for the underlying impacts to what delays schedules, how quickly are you organizationally, Dennis, able to pinpoint the catalyst or cause and then take corrective action?
Hopefully I understand the question correctly, but the key is that you need an end-to-end visibility across the entire supply chain. So it depends where the issue is occurring. For example, if there are some API delays, you need to reflect it as soon as possible in the systems and give the right decision afterwards. That sometimes if there is a longer API supply delay which impacts all Pfizer sites, for example, it's mandatory that you know how is this decision be replicated in the system and how you can reflect the decision in the system, because you can use scenarios. For example, you can simulate what will happen. So, and it depends where the delay or where the impact on your schedule and planning is. Where's the starting point, I would call it, and then you need to reflect and react as soon as possible. The system is giving you
the signals.
Signals, exactly. So, and if the signals are aligned in all sites or all Pfizer supply chains, I would call it, that's a key point for a good decision. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Aaron?
Well, I was going to say as soon as possible within the facility's ability to react to that, right? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, the best run facilities, and we get to see a lot of facilities, right? The best run facilities are the ones that are not firefighting. Yeah. And what that means is whatever change happens, if the plant can react to that change within the time period, then that's good, and you want to give them the updated information. We see a bunch of robots walking around at the fair this year. Well, robots can react quickly, right? So in a highly automated production facility, if there's a delay, then you can make a change in the schedule and push that to the robots, and they just take it and absorb it. But in plants that are more manual, right, more relying on people, their ability to react and change is not as good, and so it all comes down to buffering. At the end of the day, if you really dig into theory of constraints, it's all about having the right level of buffering. So the right level of planned or scheduled wasted time, right? To absorb the changes. You know some sort of change is going to happen. You know that something's going to impact it. So building in enough, and this is my opinion here, right? But building in enough to not cause chaos on the floor will give you way more efficiency in a schedule than keeping it too tight and always be constantly changing it because the floor can't actually execute on the schedule they're presented.
Yeah, really good point, Aaron. And I think your point, you talked about firefighting, right? Moving from what typically is kind of Excel-based firefighting and people just basically putting out one fire after another to having a stable schedule that can be relied on. And also, I think Dennis made a point around having some simulation capability, putting up schedules that are not the live production schedules, but alternative schedules that can be considered and analyzed. And actually, it's moving the schedulers in the plant from fighting fires and fighting emergencies one after the next to really analyzing how to optimize the schedule based on different criteria, different priorities, and different requirements that the business may have changing day by day. And having that capability to really go in and simulate different scheduling scenarios is a powerful capability that I think adds a lot of value to each business.
Oh, that's fantastic. In the interest of time, I want to make sure that if there's any questions, we would love an opportunity to interact and address that. Can you guys hear me? All right, fair enough. So over the course of the discussion, we talked about some of the core foundational components. Data integrity is certainly the foundation. Second is full lifecycle capture. Third is being able to access that data in real time to apply logic to drive data-driven outcomes. And then ultimately, from a change management perspective, there's always a continuous improvement. You're never going to be 100% done, but what you want to do is each day move closer to done than not. So armed with that, is there anything parting you'd like to share, Dennis, from your perspective of how, what other benefits and or thoughts we can impart?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, it's really important to have an end-to-end visibility, and that the change was from offline system to online system, that we have a possible collaboration, and that we can react as soon as possible on different events which are occurring and across the entire supply chain. So yeah,
Awesome.
That's my main point.
Well, I appreciate that. Tim, anything in closing that you want to impart?
No,
You got to put the mic on, though.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's been a very good discussion. Sorry about the mic there. Just really interested in the entire journey and talking to Dennis over the past few days. I think it's a remarkable achievement, what has been done at Pfizer, not just in Freiburg, but at the other plants as well. I guess the one question I would have, would you do anything different if you were to start over again and revisit the project? Maybe some things in retrospect that you would perhaps look at differently if you were to approach the project again.
So I would say, for me, as a team lead, the most important thing is the process adoption to the people, to say, hey, the system is changing, the behavior needs to be changed, and they were belonging over 20 or 30 years on the same Excel spreadsheet. Yeah. So for me, a really, really important step is to ensure the process adoption and the trainings for the teams is on a good quality. And I think the better the quality of trainings and standardizations, the better the output, and the people understand how the new system is changing and which positive impact has it. So I think
people resist change, right? People resist change, and I think one of the things that we try together with On-Time Edge is we want the people who will be using the software to get their hands on it as quickly as possible, right? It's not like a science project off in a corner and hey guys, in 6 months you're going to be using this. It's now. We want you to get comfortable, familiar with it, because moving from your cranky, clunky Excel sheets. Okay, everybody complains about it, but yet it's what you know and it's what you've been doing for a long time. And I think for us, collectively, with our customers, we want to have the actual end users of the system getting their hands on it as quickly as possible, initially as part of the project. That's an important thing.
One other lesson that I think that is really separates Pfizer and from most other manufacturers, and we in turn, the we in that equation is both PlanetTogether and On-Time Edge, have adopted to this. When folks get on a project, they're on that project for the duration. So the turnover is extremely low, and as a consequence, you start to develop a different type of relationship with trust. And so from a vendor perspective, our ability to react is exponentially different because we've had, the number of folks we've had on this project that are the same for the last 2 or 3 years. And the same holds true for PlanetTogether. So I think if you look as a lesson learned, you want to create an environment that is just not solely about technology, not solely about process, and not solely about the outcomes. It's an integration, a fabric or a tapestry of those 3 things, and each, as I started this talk off with, us each being a leg of the stool, it's absolutely foundational to why it's so rock solid. But Aaron, in closing, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's the biggest lesson learned always with every software project is the people that implement are experts, and they have a tendency to forget that the customer hasn't even used the software yet. Maybe they've seen a 1-hour demo, maybe they've watched a video here or there. And so it's such a trade-off between, you don't want to just ask the users what they want because they don't really know enough about the system to answer that question. And on the flip side, you don't want to just tell them that, you don't want to prescribe to them what they're going to get. There's a middle ground there, and you almost want to deploy it twice, right? You almost want to do a really quick vanilla deployment for the users to use and let them get familiar with it, and then come back and say, okay, now that you understand, what would you like to do? No one really does that because of the cost involved, but I mean, that it's not unique to PlanetTogether. It's really any software system. There's somewhere between teaching the users before they answer the requirements questions and prescribing to them what they should do. And that perfect mix is the secret sauce, I think, to any software implementation.
I think collectively the outcome is driving differentiation from from a Pfizer perspective, how quickly they're bringing these things to bear. The outcomes speak for themselves. We would love an opportunity to dig a little deeper into perhaps some of your respective challenges and offer some guidance. Please, by all means, come by and see us at our booth. We are over at
all 15. I think it's G66.
G66. But thank you very much for attending today. If there's any means, please stop one of us. We'd love to have an ongoing discussion. And thank you very much both to Dennis and Pfizer and Renee over there, our support, as well as Tim for partnering today. Hopefully, you guys collectively can walk away with some lessons learned, some best practices, and the framework of the Pfizer case study. But with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.